Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're going to take a raw financial report, the kind of document that can make your eyes just glaze right over and turn it into a story that you can actually understand.
Yeah, if you've ever seen a document like this, it's just a wall of data, right? Filled with all these tags, context references, and these long strings of numbers. It can look incredibly intimidating. It's almost like trying to read a completely different language.
But what if I told you that inside this complex sheet is a surprisingly simple story about how a business is doing? It's really just a story of money in, money out, and what's left over at the end of the day. So let's dive in and make some sense of it. To help us get from data to understanding, we're going to break it down into these 5 parts. First, we'll decode the data sheet itself. Then, we'll get into the income and expense stories, find out the bottom line profit, and finally, we'll look at how this is a business of many, many parts. Okay, first things first. We have to learn the basic language of this report. Before we can understand the story, we need to know what the key terms and numbers actually mean. This is going to give us the foundation for everything else that follows. Now, what's really interesting is that a company's financial report, well, it isn't all that different from your own household budget. Seriously, a company has income, which is kind of like your paycheck. It has expenses, just like your monthly bills. And what's left over, the profit, is basically its savings. It's the same logic, just with a lot more zeros.
It's also super important to get the context right here. We're not looking at a full year. This is just a 3-month snapshot of 3M India's performance from July to September 2019. All the figures are in Indian rupees, and they're presented in lakhs, where 1 lakh equals 100,000 rupees.
So let's move on to our first big question, and it's the one everyone always asks first. How much money did the company actually bring in from selling its products and services to all its customers? In business terms, we call this revenue. It's the top-line number, and it's probably the single best indicator of how much demand there is out there for what a company sells. A big revenue number means a lot of people are buying your stuff. Simple as that. And here is our first big number. In this 3-month period alone, 3M India's total income was over 711 crore rupees. To put that into perspective for you, that's about 7.1 billion rupees. That is a massive figure for just 1 quarter. A number this large tells you right away that 3M India has a huge presence in its market and that its products are clearly in very high demand. But, as we all know, the money you make is only half the story, isn't it? Which brings us to the other critical question. What did it cost to make all that money? Because, hey, it's not what you make, it's what you keep that really matters. These costs are the expenses. You can just think of them as the company's bills. And this covers everything, from the raw materials like plastics and chemicals used to make their products, all the way to the salaries paid to their thousands of employees. So for this quarter, 3M India's total expenses were just under 597 crore rupees. Now, that's a huge amount of money going out the door, but it's pretty much what you'd expect for a company that generated over 700 crore in revenue. And this chart does a brilliant job of showing us where that money went. Just notice the 2 biggest chunks. They make up nearly 70% of all the costs. We're talking raw materials and purchasing stock. That tells you right there that 3M is fundamentally a company that makes stuff and sells stuff. All right, so the company made money and it spent money. And that brings us to the most important question of them all. Let's get right down to the bottom line. After all the bills were paid, was the business actually profitable? There's an old saying in business that really gets to the heart of this. Big revenue numbers are nice to brag about, sure, but they don't mean much if you're spending more than you make. Profit. That's the true measure of a healthy, sustainable business. And thankfully, the calculation is super simple. You take that big income number, you subtract what was spent to earn it, and what you're left with is the profit. In this case, it's a very healthy 114.59 crore rupees. This profit of over 114 crore rupees. That is the real sign of success. It shows that the business model was working really effectively during this period. In fact, it gives them a profit margin of about 16%, which is quite solid for this type of industrial company. This is the money that can be reinvested to grow or returned to its owners. Now, for a deeper look, let's break the company down into its different parts. The detailed segment data wasn't in our main report, so we're using a report from the previous year to see where the revenue actually comes from. But this will still give us a great picture of the company's structure.
You see, a massive company like 3M isn't just one single thing. It's made up of different divisions, or what they call segments. And for an analyst or an investor, this view is absolutely critical. It shows which parts of the business are the real growth engines, and it helps you understand if the company is well diversified or if it's maybe relying a little too heavily on just one area. And wow, this chart just lays it all out so clearly. The industrial division was by far 3M India's largest source of revenue at that time. I mean, it brought in more than the safety and graphics and healthcare divisions combined.
And this is exactly why looking at the segments is so important. You might think of 3M for Post-it notes or Scotch tape, the stuff that falls under their consumer segment. But the data reveals the true story. It's business-to-business industrial sales were the absolute financial core of the company.
So from that messy, intimidating spreadsheet we started with, we've managed to uncover a really clear story. We saw how much money 3M India made, where it spent that money, how much it kept as profit, and we even figured out which parts of its business were the strongest.
You now have the basic tools to decode a financial report. You can find the narrative hidden inside the numbers. So the only question left is, what story are you going to investigate next?